the Supreme Court may be preparing to light our planet on fire. Now, here's how it works. Right now, the way that regulatory agencies, whether it's the Department of Labor, OSHA, EPA, FCC, I mean, you know, FEC, you name it. There's all these regulatory agencies, and here's how they work. Congress passes a law that creates the agency, you know, like the EPA was created in 1973. Richard Nixon signed that law. They then pass a law saying, okay, EPA, now that you exist, we want you to figure out how to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So the EPA, they've got a bunch of scientists working for them, but they reach out to other scientists as well. They convene panels of scientific inquiry. They do a deep dive. They compile all the literature they can find. Their scientists evaluate it. On some of these cases, they've got dozens of scientists, in some cases, hundreds of scientists working on things. And they finally come up with, say, here's a list of 25 things we think that the EPA should do. They then submit those things for public examination. Well, actually, they then run them past another set of bureaucrats who say, okay, which of these things is actually practical? You know, which ones are going to be too expensive to implement? They're going to cost more than the number of lives they'll save or the amount of impact they'll have. It's just not worth it. The cost-benefit ratio isn't there, which, by the way, is required by law. So they boil it down to, let's say, 10 recommendations, and then they submit those for public comment. They publish them in the Federal Register. They're submitted for public comment. You and I can go in and leave our comments on the website for the EPA and say, you know, we're in favor of it, against it. Companies can come in and lobby, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, when everything is done and the EPA has evaluated all the responses, they make the rule, and that becomes the law. And then the emissions start coming down. Well, what Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court is arguing, and by the way, his mother was the disgraced former head of the EPA. She tried to destroy the EPA and had to resign in disgrace during the Reagan administration. What Neil Gorsuch is proposing is that because the Constitution says that Congress makes the law and the executive branch executes the law, and the EPA and other regulatory agencies are part of the executive branch, that they do not have the legal power or authority to actually come up with regulations. That if there are going to be tailpipe emission standards, if there are going to be methane leakage standards from oil wells, if there are going to be chemical factory leakage standards, that Congress has to write those into the law itself. Now, what this will mean is that basically all the regulations go out the window, and Congress is going to have to reinvent every single regulatory agency and every single regulation, starting specifically with the fossil fuel ones, because that's the ones that they're going after right now. Keep in mind, Amy Coney Barrett's dad for 20-some-odd years was a lawyer for Shell Oil. Clarence Thomas, Sam Alito, Brett Kavanaugh are only on the court because of the efforts of fossil fuel billionaires and their friends. If they succeed in doing this, they will end the EPA's ability to regulate greenhouse gases. All those regulations will have to be passed all over again by Congress. And if you think the Republicans are going to let them get out of the Senate, I got a bridge to sell you. This is like the most devious plot to do what Steve Bannon said the Trump administration was going to do, quote, deconstruct the administrative state. Now, my guess is, and my prediction is, that if they rule the way that I fear they will, and do blow up these regulations, that they will drop that ruling the same day they drop the ruling on abortion or guns, so that it will be completely eclipsed and nobody will pay attention. And that's why I'm telling you in advance.